Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Lang, and I'm the director of the Being There series, which is part of Stories for Caregivers. And just recently, I was able to connect with Patti Morris, who's one of the caregivers in our series, to watch her short digital story and then have a conversation with her. So we're going to watch her story right now, and then you guys can listen into that conversation. I hope that it's helpful.
I grew up just outside of a large city. Our rural community had a small town feel, with barn dances, hockey games, and fall fairs. It was a tight-knit community, and I was lucky to grow up knowing that there was always someone there for me. When I was 14, I saw an ad in the paper seeking volunteers to become an advocate for a person with a disability. I wish I could remember why I decided to respond to that ad. What I won't forget is the feeling that washed over me in the volunteer training when I learned that there were people in the world who had literally no one to look out for them. I decided to make a lifelong commitment to one of those people who needed someone. After the training, I was introduced to Sherri. She was 16 and had spent her entire life living in various institutions. She had spastic bilateral quadriplegia cerebral palsy and was given up at birth by her parents. She had never had anyone to care for her who wasn't paid to do this. Our first meetings were awkward as we both tried to understand one another and our relationship. My mom and dad would drive me to her group home, and we'd go for walks, to movies, go swimming, or shop. As her advocate, I also attended her case meetings. It was shocking for me as a young teenager to hear her caseworkers talk about Sherri as a problem to be fixed. While they talked about medications and behavior modification programs, Sherri and I talked about boyfriends and finding her a place of her own. When I turned 18, I became Sherri's guardian. We were good friends, going on double dates and hanging out regularly. But I think I also unconsciously thought of myself as her caregiver. And in some ways I was. I helped her to move out, hire caregivers, acquire necessary equipment, pay bills, arrange medical appointments, and more. I was responsible for her well-being. But all that changed when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. It was a serious diagnosis, and all of us kids decided to move home to support our parents. At night, when Dad couldn't sleep because of the pain or the worry, we would walk the beautiful country roads together in the moonlight. It was the hardest time in my life, and Sherri understood that I was suffering badly. She began calling me every day to check in. After one emotional phone conversation, I was overwhelmed by the realization that it wasn't me looking out for Sherri. It was us looking out for one another. Today, almost 40 years after our first meeting, Sherri remains my good friend, a cherished member of our family, auntie to my girls, and great auntie to my granddaughter. I can't remember what drew me to that ad, and I also can't imagine how different my life, our lives, would be if we hadn't met each other.
So Patti, what was it like for you watching your story today? What resonated for you?
Well, I haven't watched it in a long time, and it was it was emotional actually today. Which, yeah, and I guess what resonated is how lucky I am. Obviously, so lucky you saw in the film. Lucky to have had a blessed childhood. Lucky to have met Sherri.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky to have had the dad I had who was so meaningful in my life.
Yeah.
The other thing that's kind of odd for me, Mike, is and unexpected, is that I lost my husband this year. And so
Mm-hmm.
once again, actually, Sherri has been such an amazing person in my life, in our lives. She's been back in that caregiving role, I would say. So that interplay of, sometimes you're the caregiver, sometimes you're being cared for, is something that's very, very real for me, especially in this related to my relationship with Sherri.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, those roles constantly change depending on where we're at in our lives. And I think, what I love so much about your story is that recognition of the things that you receive back from the people that you care for. Another thing sort of that we're talking a little bit about during this time is how all these caregiving relationships have been affected by sort of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown and stuff. So how has that really changed your relationship with Sherri right now? And how do you continue to care for each other? And it sounds like she has really helped you over this past year. What does that look like now?
Yeah, well, I think like others, when we first learned about COVID-19, I was exceptionally fearful. I think in part because we had suffered this big loss this year. And so I had so much worry about my little circle and just wanting to make sure everyone was safe, and Sherri being a big part of that. So it has impacted our relationship. She's lucky to live on her own. So thankfully she was in a very safe environment. She doesn't live in a group setting. And what we did was we asked caregivers who were working in other settings to not work with her, so that she just was having people that were only coming to her to work with her. And I actually stayed away from her apartment, even though, I think it probably would have been safe, but we just were trying to make sure that she was as safe as possible. But we've been keeping in touch, pretty much daily phone calls, sometimes more than once a day.
Okay.
And I have seen her recently as things have sort of eased up a bit. I've been to her apartment, and so we're keeping in close touch. And as you said, she's just been, she's a very caring person, and she's been mostly, I've been worried about her and she's been worried about me. So her daily calls to me are pretty much always checking in to see how I'm doing and how my girls are doing and how my granddaughter is.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that, even though some of those physical caregiving aspects that you used to do for Sherri, you now have other caregivers doing that relationship is still there. And even though you have to do it from a distance, I guess, over phone calls now.
And now more of my caregiving is, as it always has been too, is making sure her staff are paid and that we're getting PPE for her staff, and et cetera, doing some of the background stuff that's needed to make sure that she can stay in this home that she loves.
I could talk with you for hours, but one more question before we wrap up here. What advice do you have for people to recognize the benefits that we can all bring to each other's lives in a caregiving relationship?
I guess I would say, it isn't as life isn't, I think it's rarely black and white. And I think there is quite a bit of gray. And from my work at Wellspring and just my life, I know how important it is for caregivers to really nourish themselves and to take care of themselves. But I guess I would also, encourage people to think about, it may not be the person you're caring for who's also, reciprocating with care for you, but there probably are people in your life who are caring for you as you are actively caring, working or being a caregiver for someone else. And I think there's real value in reflecting upon that, or certainly there was for me. It took me a long time, but one of the co-founders of Wellspring, his name was John Staffier, who sadly is no longer with us, but John was a very successful businessman. And one of the real epiphanies for him when he had cancer, and I think it has relevance to this, is that he realized that he had thought of himself as really that sort of so-called self-made man. And having cancer really made him think about the fact that none of us are, that we all benefit so much from people who lift us at different points daily, moment by moment, actually. And one of the practices that he adopted that I've used as well is something called Naikan, which is an Eastern philosophy. And it's this very simple reflective practice where you ask yourself 3 questions, usually about people in your lives. And it's, what have I received from this person? So in my case, Sherri. What have I given to Sherri? And what trouble or difficulty have I caused that person? And it's really in an effort to make sure that, that we are being conscious of the many ways that we benefit from other people. So
nice. Okay, that's a great practical tip there, and those 3 questions again to make sure that we capture them, because I think they're awesome. What have I given to this person? What have I received? And what was the last one? What friction or troubles?
What trouble or difficulty have I caused this person? And you intentionally don't ask what trouble have they caused me, because the idea is really to think about how you are in the world and what impact you're making.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much for being willing to do this. I know, like you said, it's been a difficult year for you, and I just really appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to do this, but also the way that you were willing to put this story, you and Sherri's story, out into the world to support and encourage other caregivers, because from everything that we've seen, it's really encouraged so many people over the past 2.5 years. So thank you for doing that. I hope that that things go well for you in the next weeks and months ahead. So
Thanks. And for you too, Mike. Thank you. And thanks for all that you do in the world.
oh, thanks, Patti. Appreciate that.